Good morning, everyone. We'll kick off in a couple of minutes. We'll give some last-minute stragglers an opportunity to join in. Okay, welcome everyone to the final event in Energy Week. Today's session is in three parts. Firstly, we'll be presenting a data dashboard that draws from the inaugural Whole of System Plan. We'll then give insights on how data can be used for storytelling, and we'll finish off with a Q&A on both of the presentations. For those that don't know me, I'm Noel Ryan, Acting Assistant Coordinator, Market Development Coordination at Energy Policy WA. The event is being live streamed and recorded, so please bear that in mind. The Q&A session at the end is a popularity contest. Vote for the questions you want answered, as we only have 10 minutes to cover them at the end. Before we begin, as we gather for this meeting, physically dispersed via virtual means, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we do our business today, the Whadjuk people. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. It feels like it's been a few months since we've really spoken about the WASP. So just to remind everyone about the context for the WASP. So over the past 2 years, the Energy Transformation Strategy, led by the Energy Transformation Task Force, produced the first Whole of System Plan, or WASP, released the DER roadmap and made a series of changes to the wholesale electricity rules. Lots of work in a short time with huge assistance from our stakeholders. The first WASP was developed with detailed input from Western Power and AEMO and broad engagement with industry. It shows how our power system may evolve over the next 20 years under 4 different scenarios based on different assumptions relating to demand, economic growth and technology uptake. While the inaugural WASP showed that there would still be significant investment in new renewable energy generation capacity on the basis of economics alone, at the time the scenarios and input assumptions were finalised, there was no state climate policy, and we did not attempt to target any particular emissions outcome. Now we have a state climate policy that requires investigation into how to meet the state's ambition of net zero emissions by 2050, and the intent is to include this as a target in future modelling exercises. So you can see there on that slide, we've got the proportion of renewables increasing quite significantly under all scenarios. As noted in the recent Energy Transformation Strategy Stage 2 document released by Minister Johnston on 14 July 2021, we're now moving into the next stage of the Energy Transformation Strategy with initiatives grouped around these 4 themes. We are tentatively targeting completion of the next WASP for mid-2023 and are envisaging an 18-month development process allowing ample time for consultation and to include any developments in government policy. So, yeah, I think you can expect to start hearing things from us late this calendar year. Today, we are pleased to release the data dashboard, which enables users to interact with the data used in the first whole system plan. The data dashboard will be accessible after this event on the website, which we'll show you the link for it later on. We'll now hand over to Stephen Cruitt, who worked on WASP 1, and provided the next 10 minutes goes well, will be an integral part of the team delivering WASP 2.
Thank you, Noel. Today I'm going to take everyone through a brief tour of the WASP data dashboard, which we've put together to present the results of the WASP in a more interactive manner for people. So while we did release appendices to the WASP containing a lot of the data presented here today, we really wanted to make it more accessible to a wider audience by ranging from industry to the general public, really ensuring that people could gain quick insights from this WASP data without needing to trawl through spreadsheets and pull it all together themselves. To that end, we've front-loaded the dashboard with some explanatory info on the WASP with an overview of the modelling approach, descriptions of the demand scenarios modelled, where you can look at either grid demand or underlying demand by toggling through, and an opportunity to look at how that demand looks in the 11 different areas of the network modelled. So if we click through here, the zone we pick will be highlighted on the map. And you can see how demand can vary between the different scenarios. We have some more background information here on the modelling approach, which I'll just click through quickly, and a map of the Swiss, followed by a map of the existing and committed generators at the time of publication of the WASP, which is color-coded here according to the network zone that each of the generators is in, but can also be changed to generation type. So for instance, here I can see in the green, you have wind farms, mostly in this Midwest North Country type area and down in the south of the state, whereas you've got coal in the Southwest here region as well. And again, you can look at this by zone. So if, for instance, I wanted to look at Metro Southwest, you can zoom in here. Is one of the committed facilities that we assumed would be built after the model started. And so now onto the WASP results. This first page here provides a brief summary of each scenario, showing the evolution of the generation and storage capacity mix over time. You can click through each of the scenarios on the left here and see how they compare. And then the next page, we have generation and storage in particular in more detail. Now, say we only wanted to look at generation and not storage, because we have another page coming up on storage alone. You can click through to that. And then again, if I wanted to remove this large yellow area, the rooftop PV, which is actually an input into the model, you can click through and then just look at large scale generation on its own, for example. And this can be arranged on the left here by cumulative capacity over time, by the individual capacity additions and retirements year on year, and also the net output of these facilities. Next up, we have a similar page purely on storage, as I referred to before. And again, you can look at your capacity additions and retirements in a single year or your cumulative capacity. For network. So again, if I just wanted to look at Metro North, for instance, you would see that. On this page, we show where and when new network transfer capacity was built by the model. So for example, here we can see all the augmentations made on the top graph here. at various times. So for instance, in 2028, an extra 1,250 megawatts was added between Southwest and Metro. And if we drill down to a specific link, let's say near above to Midwest, for example, you can see how that evolves over time. So we start out with 700 megawatts of transfer capacity between the two nodes, and then over time we have these additions in the top here. An extra 1,000 is added, which you can see reflected down here, and then another 1,200 in 2035. And on the map on the right, we do have indicative links between the zones, but I should caveat that these are very much provided only to give a simple visual of the zones being connected, and they don't reflect the actual location of network infrastructure between the different zones modeled. On this page, we have some information that was provided in the WASP appendices on the ESS requirements that went into the modeling. These varied over time based on factors such as the level of intermittent generation in the system. So for example, here we can see frequency regulation requirement during daytime hours. This is different during the nighttime when solar PV isn't producing anymore. You don't see that ramp up anymore. And you can also look at contingency reserve as well. The next page summarizes overall real system costs in each of the 4 scenarios. And these are broken down into cost types such as CapEx, your fuel costs, operation, maintenance, etc. And I'll skip the next page because I'll save that for last because that is a bit newer than some of the other stuff we'll be looking at. But first, we have our emissions pages. And in this one, we can see emissions and emissions intensity in each scenario, along with some contextual information around the demand and also the renewable penetration over time in each of these scenarios. And again, you can toggle through and look at different scenarios on the left. There is another emissions page where you can look at each of the 4 scenarios in direct comparison. And this shows you the emissions, and you can look at emissions intensity, first of all, based on end user demand, and also your grid emissions intensity based on operational demand on the grid. And finally, back to page 15, which has a breakdown of market revenues from the WASP's dispatch model. This was covered briefly in the WASP report, but is fleshed out in a fair bit more detail here. So on the left, for instance, we look at the market share of different types of generation and storage technologies, and this can be filtered by the different ESS energy and capacity markets. So if I want to look at capacity, that might look different there. Frequency regulation, etc. On the right, we can look at different revenue streams for the different technology types in the modeling. So for example, here we can see that 2-hour batteries are getting the bulk of their revenue in this particular scenario from the ESS markets. And in fact, if you look at the chart on the left, that kind of backs that up. You see this light purple bar here represents 2-hour batteries, and they're quite dominant in that market. You could also, for example, look at 4-hour batteries on the right here, and that doesn't look as good for them. And that's because in this particular scenario, Castaway, 2-hour batteries are generally built by the model until the very end when the 4-hour batteries come in. But if you looked at, say, Techtopia or Double Bubble, you have much more prevalence, I suppose, of the 4-hour batteries, and they're starting to play in different markets. You see that they're getting a lot of their revenue here from energy and capacity markets as demand in those scenarios is particularly high. And that takes us to the end of the dashboard. So thank you all for bearing with me through that. And the dashboard will be live on the Apple website after this event, so you'll be able to jump in and play around with it yourselves. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session, but first I'm going to hand you over to Matt Neal from Lime Theory, who is going to take us through a very cool presentation on storytelling with data. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks, everyone. Good morning. As Steve mentioned, my name is Matt Neal. I'm the Director and Principal Consultant at a company called Lime Theory. Lime Theory is a Perth-based consulting company, and we've got a focus on Microsoft Power BI, and data platform project strategy, coaching and training. But basically, we help organisations to make better decisions with their data using reporting and data solutions. But today, what I'm here to talk about is storytelling with data, why it's important, and also showing you some practical examples of how you can do it successfully. So today, we're almost literally drowning in data. The world is becoming more and more digitised every day. The systems that we use are recording data and storing it in large amounts and for longer or in perpetuity. And the ways that we're receiving data is changing rapidly as well, with the advent of mobile devices becoming such an important part of our lives. And with that, the speed of the data is becoming more rapid, with fast networks, including things like 5G communications coming into play. The speed that the data is coming at us is even faster than it used to be. Messages are becoming more mixed, and it's becoming more difficult to make sure the information that we're getting is trustworthy and is based in fact. And through a combination of these things, our attention spans are getting shorter due to this barrage of information and notifications that are just becoming more and more part of our daily lives. So what is storytelling with data? We feel that storytelling with data is the ability to find the right message and deliver it effectively to the audience is what makes storytelling. And we're going to go through some examples of this during this presentation, but just to lead off, the message here is what you're saying. And it's so important to find the right message in the data that you have, making sure that it's appropriate to the audience and that it can drive action or a decision as part of that. And articulation here is how you say it. So it's presenting the message in a clear way that gives the audience their best chance to receive and absorb and then action that information. And visual presentation is also aligned to how the brain interprets this information, and that's a critical part of how that message gets articulated. And technology can help, but it's really more about thoughtful layout and design and the way that that message is presented, which we're going to go through today. And I'll show you some examples of good storytelling now. One of them is public reports and white papers. Now, glossy reports and presentations, they'll often tell a story with a narrative, and the good ones use data and visuals to back up that story. Some good examples of this are white papers or company reports, public-facing reports, investor presentations, startup pitch decks. But a great example that we're here to talk about today is the WASP, the Whole of System report. Now, these type of reports often use data to support a narrative, which can be displayed in text. The data visualizations like charts, they really help the audience to absorb the message quickly beyond just reading the text, and they often work hand in hand with that. And just in the lead up to actually producing that report, the narrative and the findings are almost always the outputs of a thorough analysis of that underlying data itself. And this is the narratives and the findings are then selected through a combination of understanding and experience in the subject area. Next slide, please. Another great example here is an emerging field called data journalism. Now this is around having data-driven and visual and interactive storytelling that's really aimed at a broader audience. A good example of this is the ABC. ABC News here in Australia. They've got departments called Story Lab or the Digital Storytelling Unit, and what they do is they develop a narrative and tell a story using interactive visuals and infographics published through their various channels, either on the web or through their mobile devices. And what data journalism does is it uses data visualization to augment that narrative and to break down complex topics to make it easier to understand for the broader audience. And also adding in interactivity, it helps to drive engagement. And engagement is really important in being able to tell a story properly, because if something's interesting and provides a unique experience, it then helps that message to become more memorable for the audience. Another great example here is really around high quality data visualizations or infographics. Now this one's from another news organization, from the Wall Street Journal. And this is a very simple, straightforward picture that is distilling a lot of complexity and making it easy to understand. So it might be a little bit small here, but I'll just walk through what this is showing. Now, this chart here is showing the infection rates for measles in the United States over the course of about 100 years. The y-axis you see there is the states of the US. The x-axis is time, with the increments basically being a single year. And the colour scheme that you see there is the infection rate for measles. Now, that horizontal black line you see just about halfway through there is the time when the vaccine was introduced for measles. Now, what I like about this chart is that there are many, many data points here, but it's condensed down and presented in such a way that the visual attributes of colour and the placement in a time series that really tells a powerful story of the effectiveness of the vaccines. So I spoke earlier about the message as a very important part of storytelling, and it really is critical, because no matter how well a story is told, it actually won't have value without the base information providing value. So we can break that down in a few different ways with the message. And first of all, I'd like to think about who is the message for. It's really important to understand your audience, the level of experience and I guess pre-existing knowledge that audience might have in the area, and also what level of detail is relevant to that audience. They might be very senior people within an organisation who just need the helicopter view of things, or they might be the doers at the bottom level of the organisation who need a whole lot of data to analyse what you're presenting. The what is about finding what information is relevant. So it's selecting information that's relevant to the audience that we figured out and their interests. It's making sure that the message is accurate and it tells the whole story. And we're going to show some examples of that in a moment. But the what also comes from finding an understanding of the data and the true message here. It's about finding the signal within the noise. And the best way to do that is through having subject matter expertise in the area, or a thorough analysis of the data, and really considering any of the contributing factors that would come into it. And finally, we've got the why, and this is about why are we choosing this data? How will the message drive a decision or an action for the audience? And the best data stories are crafted to spark change rather than just presenting raw data. So I'm going to show you some examples now of what the message should be crafted with. And this chart you're seeing here on the screen, it's about as old as the internet itself, so apologies if you've seen this, but what we're trying to show here is that correlation does not equal causation. So this is showing from a Northern Hemisphere standpoint that there appears to be a correlation, or there is a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. The problem with this chart is that it's missing something. It's missing a series of data, most likely average temperature, or more accurately, the number of visitors that might go to the beach. The presentation of data in this way can actually drive incorrect decisions or actions, like not buying a delicious ice cream out of fear of being attacked by a shark. And this is in a similar vein. This particular chart is from a blog post on a DataViz website called Spurious Correlations. And what the chart's showing here is the red data series is showing per capita cheese consumption, and the black series is showing the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. Now, this is a good example of real data that has a correlation, but there is actually no link between them. unless you count the affected cheese nightmares, but that's a different story. So the message here is to really be cautious about presenting data blindly without understanding the context of it. And some things that you might be able to do around this is, if the subject area that you're producing visualizations or reporting on is outside your key area of knowledge or experience, to go and seek out that subject matter expertise, or ask somebody to have a look and review as a double check, just to make sure what you're presenting is meaningful. And finally, this is another example of the need to really tell the whole story in a visualization. Now this chart, it makes really good use of visual elements. It's got a nice flat design. It clearly shows the data points well. The colors here are representative of something. It tells a strong story. This is showing job creation in the US from December 2007 through July 2012. And I'll just walk through this if you can't see what's on here. So the x-axis here is showing time, and the y-axis is showing the level of job creation. Now, in this situation, the colors here mean something, because the red here represents the Republican Party, the blue color represents the Democrat Party, and that line with the arrow there says President Obama takes office. Now, what this chart really is trying to show is that when President Obama came into office, the rate of job creation started moving from the negative and moving back up into the positive. The issue that I have with this chart, Mark Twain once said, there are three types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, what's not being shown on this chart is an external factor. On the x-axis, where the job creation levels start to dip below zero, that's December 2007. And at the point right about when Obama takes office and the job creation levels start to increase again, that's December 2008. Now, the macroeconomic event happening in this time frame was the global financial crisis, or the Great Recession. And this has a real impact on job creation that's just not actually mentioned in this visualization at all. So the reason I'm showing this is that I feel that if you're developing visualizations, telling a story with data, you've got a responsibility to present the whole story. Otherwise, you risk misleading the audience and potentially reducing trust in your message. Next slide, please. Articulation is as equally as important as the message when it comes to storytelling with data. The world is data rich, but people are time and attention poor. So our challenge here is to actually present our message in a way that makes it easy to interpret, makes it easy to absorb, and to actually be engaging, to give it the best chance of the message landing with our audience. So how can we do this? We can actually use science to help. And we can use science around how humans interpret information to help with articulating our message and making sure that it lands. And there are three elements here that we can talk through around iconic memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. So the iconic memory is really talking about designing things for the first 3 seconds of attention, for that subconscious processing that the viewer will have when they first look at your data visualization, to give it the best chance of that information being absorbed and not getting discarded. And the short-term memory is around designing for absorption. So it's using user experience techniques to actually design your visualizations so that they have the best chance of that message being absorbed by the audience. And finally, to get into that long-term memory, really need to have that engaging experience and to be using that narrative to help make it memorable and for that message to truly land and hopefully drive actions or decisions out the back of it. So let's talk about iconic memory and the fact that less is more here. So this is a data visualization that I found on the internet. What it's showing is the nationality of the largest group of tourists by country in Europe. Frankly, this visualization is it's overwhelming. It's pretty much an assault on the senses. Even my 5-year-old son said this straight away when he looked at this chart. Data visualizations, I feel it's a bit like a pizza. If you put too many toppings on, it just makes things a bit confusing and you end up with a bit of a mess. So whenever you're designing a data visualization, when we're talking about iconic memory, the key here is to reduce the visual noise. We like to have a flat design. We like to reduce colors. And in this case, the use of flags, there certainly is a lot of use of color here, but you may want to simplify the color usage to convey the message a lot more simply, potentially use some muted colors or highlight the areas that are of key interest. Removing elements that are unnecessary and not adding value to the data, things like background images or 3D effects. I mean, everyone's seen a 3D column chart or a 3D pie chart in Excel. Those really are sort of from the 90s, and the design process means that the 3D effects, they're actually taking away from the ability of your audience to interpret the data cleanly. Here's another good test around iconic memory, and this one's about layout. So what I've got shown on the screen here, for the most part in Western culture, is the way that people's attention are drawn. And that's just because we've been trained to read from left to right and top to bottom. So we can take advantage of this as we're designing dashboards, reports, visualizations, to actually position the key information that you want your audience to absorb quickly in the top left corner, the top row of the chart, or in the middle. And we often do that in the visuals we produce. We have the real headline figures, make them large, clear, and put in those areas where the eye is naturally drawn, because that's a really powerful way for your audience to start to absorb that information within the first seconds that they start to look at a chart. Then we can move beyond the iconic memory into the short-term memory. And there are some principles around psychology of how humans will actually have perceived visuals, around visual perception. These are used in user experience design very commonly, and it's around helping you design your visuals in a way that the human brain will actually subconsciously absorb the information better. The principles are focused around how the brain will simplify and organize complex images or a whole lot of complexity in data points. There are a few of these principles, but I've distilled it down to 4 that I think are key for data visualization. The first one here is proximity. You see that on the left. And proximity is about grouping the elements together and by grouping together physically in space, they indicate a similarity or a relationship between them. So some ways that we can use this in reporting is to group related KPIs or charts physically together on the page and have some spacing between them. That provides some separation for the audience, and even subconsciously, they have an understanding that those elements are separate and not directly related. Similarity is an important technique as well. So our eyes pick up visual similarity very well, whether that be in regards to shape or the color of a particular element. So that means that differences will stand out, like those white dots that you see. And we can use this to our advantage. So again, the ways that we typically use this in practice are around using highlight colors selectively, using highlight colors to draw attention or to take action. Now, what this sometimes means is that I think everyone's probably seen traffic lighting across the report, that everyone's seen reports that are kind of lit up like a Christmas tree with your red and green and the orange, which in and of itself is not bad, but having all of that color on the page, it can be distracting. And so ways that we like to do things is sometimes don't use your traditional traffic lighting, just highlight something that needs attention. If you've missed a target or you've got an unfavorable variance, just use that red or whatever the highlight color should be. You might find that actually will drive more attention to what really needs that attention. Enclosure is another powerful mechanism to present your visuals, just including some contrast or a border around particular elements on the page. Again, it naturally allows the audience to group those, even subconsciously, so that they're similar or related items. So you can do that by, again, grouping KPIs with a border or a background box, or even within a chart that might need to have a particular grouping of elements or particular months or periods highlighted to have some narrative called out on them. Finally, continuity. Continuity is very powerful. The eye will visually follow curvature and lines. In this way, the trend is your friend. We use continuity and trends very effectively in visualizations because it tells a good story about what's happened over the last certain amount of time when you're talking about time series data. It doesn't necessarily have to be a large chart with detailed axes included. It can actually be what we call spark lines, which are very small condensed trend lines that don't actually have the numbers on them that indicate what those values are, but it's enough to indicate a trend and directionally what's been occurring with the data over time. And finally, what I want to show today is a great video that is on YouTube for anyone to have a look at. It's from a guy called Hans Rosling from 2010, and I think it's a really great example of visual storytelling. So we'll have a watch now.
Visualization is right at the heart of my own work too. I teach global health. And I know having the data is not enough. I have to show it in ways people both enjoy and understand. Now, I'm going to try something I've never done before. Animating the data in real space, with a bit of technical assistance from the crew. So, here we go. First, an axis for health. Life expectancy, from 25 years to 75 years. And down here, an axis for wealth, income per person, $400, $4,000, and $40,000. So down here is poor and sick, and up here is rich and healthy. Now, I'm going to show you the world 200 years ago, in 1810. Here come all the countries. Europe brown, Asia red, Middle East green, Africa south of Sahara blue, and the Americas yellow. And the size of the country bubbles show the size of the population. And in 1810, it was pretty crowded down there, wasn't it? All countries were sick and poor. Life expectancy were below 40 in all countries. And only UK and the Netherlands were slightly better off, but not much. And now, why start the world? The Industrial Revolution makes countries in Europe and elsewhere move away from the rest. But the colonized countries in Asia and Africa, they are stuck down there. And eventually, the Western countries get healthier and healthier. And now we slow down to show the impact of the First World War and the Spanish flu epidemic. What a catastrophe. And now I speed up through the 1920s and the 1930s. And in spite of the Great Depression, Western countries forge on towards greater wealth and health. Japan and some others try to follow, but most countries stay down here. Now, after the tragedies of the Second World War, we stop a bit to look at the world in 1948. 1948 was a great year. The war was over, Sweden topped the medal table at the Winter Olympics, and I was born. But the differences between the countries of the world was wider than ever. United States was in the front, Japan was catching up. Brazil was way behind, Iran was getting a little richer from oil, but still had short lives. And the Asian giants, China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indonesia, they were still poor and sick down here. But look what is about to happen. Here we go again. In my lifetime, former colonies gained independence, and then finally they started to get healthier and healthier and healthier. And in the 1970s, then countries in Asia and Latin America started to catch up with the Western countries. They became the emerging economies. Some in Africa follows. Some Africans were stuck in civil war and others hit by HIV. And now we can see the world today in the most up-to-date statistics. Most people today live in the middle, But there are huge differences at the same time between the best of countries and the worst of countries. And there are also huge inequalities within countries. These bubbles show country averages, but I can split them. Take China, I can split it into provinces. There goes Shanghai. It has the same wealth and health as Italy today. And there is the poor inland province Guizhou. It is like Pakistan. And if I split it further, the rural parts are like Ghana in Africa.
And yet, despite the enormous disparities today, we have seen 200 years of remarkable progress. That huge historical gap between the West and the rest is now closing. We have become an entirely new converging world. And I see a clear trend into the future. With aid, trade, green technology and peace, it's fully possible that everyone can make it to the healthy, wealthy corner.
Well, what you just seen in the last few minutes is a story of 200 countries shown over 200 years and beyond. It involved plotting of 120,000 numbers. Pretty neat, huh?
Thank you, Hans. Now, while this video was produced over a decade ago, I think it's a really great example of quality visual storytelling principles that actually present a good narrative. If you could just go back one slide, please, I'll finish off talking through the video. Thanks. Because as you heard him say at the end there were many data points, over 150,000 data points, but they're presented in a way that it's easy to interpret and be engaging and tell a story in a really condensed way, in a condensed time frame. So a few of the elements I want to call out in what we saw there were the use of colours. So colours will immediately, which in this case was representing continents, it immediately showed you clusters of the data and made them more easily identifiable within the different countries. The size of the bubbles here, it had meaning, and this is a standard mechanism if you're using scatter plots to actually making use of all of the elements on the chart to actually have representative data and to actually have meaning. The other thing that I really like about the way that this is presented is the use of the time scale and of animation. If you look at that number of data points, those number of countries, it would be incredibly difficult to actually illustrate and tell the same story if you didn't make use of animation and of flexing that time dimension over time to tell the story. It's just would not be a simple task to present that amount of information and show that change in a static chart. And there are some other techniques that he showed here which weren't all that common a decade ago, but are quite common now with modern business intelligence tools. And one of those I'd call out here is the drill down capability, where you saw he took that large China bubble and split out the Shanghai and the rural components and some of the other countries as well. So that element of taking the large average and being able to drill down into that detail in a targeted way, it's one of the hallmarks of the common interactive BI tools that are available today. But finally, we've got the fact that the narrative here, it helped to provide some interpretation of the data being shown. If we played this video on mute, you wouldn't have had the same impact, because the way that Hans was providing that ongoing narrative, it helped to add that context, and also he's enthusiastic about it. He's close to the data, and the way that his enthusiastic delivery was received by the audience, it really helps with that engagement and helps for his message to be memorable. So yeah, I think it's a great example of quality data storytelling. Next slide, thanks. So there are lots of different technologies that can be used here. Some of the common things you might be able to use to tell a story with your data around office and design tools. So things like Excel. Excel is one of the biggest business intelligence tools. It's been in use for 20 odd years or more. it's a great way of being able to analyze data, present simple charts, and do pivoting and slicing and dicing. Whereas PowerPoint is a great way to then combine those charts and those insights with the data that you've interpreted. And the design, there's other tools out there like Canva, which is a great online graphic design tool, Adobe Spark. These would be really good options if you wanted to create some engaging infographics and that type of thing. And then we can move across to the business intelligence tools. And there are tools such as Microsoft Power BI, which the WASP dashboard we showed today was created in, and other tools such as Tableau or ClickView, ClickSense. These are the market leaders when it comes to business intelligence tools, which is really, it's a tool set that allows you to connect to your data and to provide interpretation and interactive published dashboards to your end users that really help the users to interact with the data themselves and generate their own insights. And also there are other tools out there. Data science is obviously, it's here and now, and it's only going to get bigger around the use of tools like R and Python to analyze large data sets. There's also a lot of open source tools out there as well, things like Articulator. It's a Microsoft Labs product that integrates in with Power BI and lets you start to create your own type of custom charts that could be presented through your traditional dashboards, as well as some open source data viz tools such as Chart.js and Grafana. But I guess overall, there's a lot of icons here on this page. There's going to be more tools, different tools in the future that we probably don't really foresee today. But the real message I wanted to you to take away from this presentation is that it's actually not about technology. There's a lot to the science of how you present a quality data visualization. And that really is around finding the right message, making sure that it's articulated well. And if you get those two right, hopefully that means that an effective story will be told. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now up to the third part of the session, questions and answers on the two presentations that you've seen. So myself, Steve Cruitt, Matt Neal are available for questions. So far we got 6, running a couple of minutes on schedule, so we might have time for a couple of more questions. So yeah, if anything comes to mind while we're talking, let us know. So we might start with a couple of questions for Steve Cruitt. And so I'll ask them both and then transfer over. Steve's at quarantine in his house. The system works. Apparently the police have knocked on his door a couple of times, so it's all good. So Steve, question 1, can you export data from the dashboard? And secondly, can gas and coal consumption be outputted?
All right, thank you for the intro, Noel. So in response to the first question, unfortunately, no, we weren't able to add the ability to export the data from the published dashboard. That was a little annoying for us, but those who are keen to explore that underlying data, we did provide spreadsheets as appendices to the WASP report, and they are available at the WASP section of the Brighter Energy Future website. And also we have links to them on the final page of the dashboard itself. So you would get that sort of big data dump, I suppose, instead of the ability to kind of drill through from the graphs, which is a little irritating, but it's all there if you want it. And in response to question 2, can gas and coal consumption be output? No, we have the output from gas and coal generators in terms of energy, but no, in putting together the WASP, we consulted with stakeholders on modelling inputs, including the owners of generation units on some of their more confidential technical parameters, such as their heat rates, to get the most accurate information possible. We didn't publish those heat rates for individual generators, so we also haven't published the coal and gas resource usage, I suppose, because that could be used to back calculate that kind of sensitive generator information. But the generation output from those coal and gas facilities is all there. That's it. Thanks.
Okay, I've got a question for Matt that isn't written down. So your 5-year-old walks in and looks at that hideous map with all the countries, and he said it was an assault on the senses, because mine just would have said, "Can you put Batman on?" Is that what happened?
It wasn't quite those words, no, but yeah, he certainly said, "Oh, that looks busy," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So even a 5-year-old knows that. Yeah, it's difficult to interpret what's going on there, and I guess that I'll talk about user experience a little bit. Everyone's got, if you've got children, you know that they're experts on iPhones and iPads and that type of thing. And that's because those devices have been designed with very intuitive user experience in mind. So I think if you can design a dashboard that a 5-year-old can interpret well, that's maybe a good bar to be setting.
Okay, so the first real question for Matt, do you use a particular tool or software to help you develop presentations apart from Microsoft BI?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. We use a few different tools around putting together presentations, and I guess there's two aspects to it. It's the analysis of the data, and then how the visualization might get put together, and then you've also got the narrative and the interpretation that comes from it too. Power BI in and of itself is just a tool. It can be used to do some prototypes if you've got data there ready to go. But I've mentioned a couple of the other tools today that can also be used to either analyze the data or to put together a prototype. Excel is really great at being able to look through the data itself to understand it. And then things like PowerPoint, it can be a really great tool to use if you want to prototype what a visual layer looks like. And as you're figuring out what that message should be and what the visuals should look like and the way that they're presented, often that can be an iterative process with your audience or your stakeholders. And so having the ability to put something visually representative in place quickly is probably more important as you're doing the initial designs than getting it 100% right in the final tool like Power BI.
Is there any resources or training you would recommend, particularly around the science-based principles?
Yeah, so there's a lot of training on Power BI that's available online. Things like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy, some of those other online kind of courses. Yeah, you'll if you stumble around the internet, you'll definitely find some of those pretty quickly. There's other options around classroom-based type of training. In here in Perth, there's a lot of great providers who offer training in Power BI and data visualization. But I guess more around the science-based principles. Look up Gestalt principles. There are some good resources online that will help around that science of interpretation. I'd also recommend looking up some of the books from a person named Stephen Few. He's a very well-respected expert when it comes to data visualization and quality data presentation. Some of his books that I'd recommend are called Signal, it's called Signal, Finding Sense in a World of Noise, and there's also called The Data Loom. And those are really focused around finding the right message and then articulating it so that it can be interpreted by the audience, similar to the principles that we spoke about today.
What are the top 3 mistakes you see when people use and present with data?
Okay, top 3 mistakes. Quite often, one of the biggest mistakes that can be made is not having accurate data. If you present something as fact and say that the data is accurate there, if it's not correct or if it's misleading or missing a component, that can be really harmful to the message that you're trying to convey. It's inaccurate data that ends up bringing in a lack of trust in the visuals that you put up. And once you lose the trust, you lose that ability to tell that story. The other main issue I see around data visualizations, it's the volume of data. people will have access to data sets and quite often can spin out a multitude of reports that are not considered in the way that they're presenting that data. So having a purpose for a particular page or the way that you're presenting the data is really important, and providing context of that information, and hopefully driving towards an insight that you're wanting your audience to take away, or an action that you're wanting them to take away from that. But finally, it's the visual nature of the pages, and I showed some examples of it today. But having too many colors on the page, having the clutter, there's the background images, or the a lot of drop shadows, 3D effects. Those are really, really distracting for the audience. You look at, it's called, back in the day, skeuomorphic design. Apple was very, very much across that probably 5-6 years ago, but everyone moved towards sort of a more flat design language with the way that interfaces are put together around the user interfaces in our mobile phones and websites, as well as presentations. So keeping things simple and clean it'll stand you in really good stead to make sure that your message is heard.
Okay, so we've got a question for me. How were the WASP scenarios created? Yeah, so with that, we were specifically using a scenario-based approach rather than trying to work out a best forecast, because for planning purposes, you need to be able to understand if things change, what do you need to do differently, and which really draws out what the no regrets things that you can spend money on. So you're really looking for changes in variables that'll impact on what you might need to do differently in terms of network spend and generation spend. So things like changes in demand, differences in PV uptake, differences in technology uptake. And so at the time, Western Power had a series of internal scenarios that had developed for the purposes of network planning, and we effectively lifted and shifted those. One of the opportunities with the second WASP that we see is spending more time working with stakeholders on the makeup of each of the scenarios, in particular in terms of things how we model emissions, because it's all very well to say the target's 0, but how quickly do you get there? Do you lock in a linear glide path, or is there some other method? So one of the things that we'll definitely be doing is spending a number of months working with stakeholders on the scenario second time around. So another question for me: will the dashboard be updated over time? Not sure. Really looking for feedback from people over time. So the way it's set up, it's easily updatable, but maybe there's a better way to do it. Do we, if we do sensitivities between WASPs, do we upload them to it? Do we just throw the thing out and start again next time around? I think it really depends on how useful people find it, and maybe also the answer to the next question that I'm about to ask Matt, which is, Matt, what other visualizations would you recommend to improve the WASP data dashboard?
Well, thanks for the question. And look, I think what it comes down to is having something out there, and potentially the ability to receive feedback from the audience is going to be a powerful thing. It's difficult to say off the bat what visualizations might necessarily improve it. It's about being able to tell tell the message and really distill down the messages you have in the glossy WASP report, making it interactive for your audience. So you'll gather feedback over time and taking advantage of some of the things like the use of slices, drill downs, drill throughs, and hover overs to provide that contextual information. That might be something to look at. It'll more than likely be, what data do you not have in your current dashboard that could actually provide value or more context to the plan? And as you just said, like, how could you maybe do a comparison between previous plans or previous releases and a new one going forward?
Okay, final question for Matt. How do you choose when to use Excel, Power BI, Tableau, Python, and other tools?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because often they're technologies, they're tools. Each of them have got their strengths. So, Excel is really great at being very, very customizable, accessible to a lot of users, familiar to a lot of users. So that's a great way of just being able to jump in and do some ad hoc analysis. Your tools like Power BI and Tableau, they've each got their strengths and weaknesses. And so they're really more designed for your more polished but interactive type of dashboards, where you're wanting to connect to your data sources and keep them updated in an automated way, or publish those visuals and present them to a broader audience, whether that be within your organisation or to the public, like what we've done here with the WASP. Tools like Python, they integrate with some of these modern BI tools, and they're really for a specific kind of data science, technical kind of audience, normally being done over large data sets, but the insights that you can surface through the use of data science tools can be very, very valuable. And so you might not need to integrate with the tool directly. It could be findings that you have by analysing a huge data set with Python that you put together into 5 numbers and place into a PowerPoint deck. As long as it gets that message across to people, the technology choice will come to your level of experience and ability to use it to really find that outcome of the getting the right message across.
Okay, thank you everyone who dialed in today. Thank you, Matt and Steve. An email will come out later today with links for the dashboard that you can look at. At our peak, we had 95 people dialing in for a data session, which was exciting and a little bit weird. But yeah, I hope you all got something out of it, and happy to take any feedback on this session, things we can do better with the data dashboard, and we'll be in contact later on in the year about the second WASP. Thank you for your time.